The studio spent nearly 20 years and over $40 million trying to make this film before a single camera rolled. Nicolas Cage was cast and then uncasted. Tim Burton developed it for years. MTG quit over a fear of flying, and the director who finally made it insisted on casting a complete unknown over the studio's explicit objections. That was Superman Returns, a film that took longer to develop than most careers last, cost $270 million to produce, and arrived to discover that audiences had moved on. Today, 15 facts about Superman Returns, from the 2 decades Warner Brothers spent trying to get it made, to the unknown actor who convinced a director to fight for him, to the dedication at the end of the credits that carries more weight than most films ever manage. Stick around. Fact 1. The film spent nearly 20 years in development before a single frame was shot. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace damaged the franchise badly in 1987. Warner Brothers spent the following 15 years trying to revive it. By the time Singer began production in 2004, the accumulated development cost was estimated at over $40 million, spent entirely on films that never got made. The list of creative teams that came and went reads like an alternate history of 1990s Hollywood. Kevin Smith wrote a draft. Tim Burton was attached for years. Brett Ratner was briefly involved. J.J. Abrams wrote a version. McG was hired and then departed, reportedly after refusing to fly to Australia for filming. Each departure sent the project back to zero. Singer inherited not just the assignment, but 2 decades of failed momentum. Fact 2. Nicolas Cage spent years preparing to play Superman and never filmed a frame. The most surreal chapter of the development period was the Tim Burton version. Burton spent approximately 3 years in pre-production with Nicolas Cage attached as Superman. Costume tests were conducted. Production design was developed. Burton's vision was reportedly radical, far from any traditional interpretation of the character. Cage had already legally changed his surname as a tribute to Luke Cage from Marvel Comics, making him, by one reading, the first person named after a superhero to nearly play a different one. When the production collapsed in 1998, an estimated $30 million had been spent on a film that never started principal photography. Test footage has since circulated online. It is exactly as strange as you'd expect from Tim Burton's involvement. Fact 3. Warner Brothers wanted a star. Singer wanted someone nobody had heard of. When Singer came aboard, he made a casting decision that made Warner Brothers deeply uncomfortable. Rather than an established star, he wanted Brandon Routh, an actor with a thin television resume and essentially no film profile. The studio pushed back. Singer held his ground. His argument was specific. Christopher Reeve had been relatively unknown when cast in 1978, and part of what made that film work was the audience's ability to believe in the character without a pre-existing star persona. Routh bore a striking physical resemblance to Reeve. Singer felt this continuity, visual and tonal, mattered more than marquee value. The studio eventually relented. Routh's performance received almost universally positive notices, which settled the argument. Fact 4. Singer found Routh through an audition tape submitted for a completely different project. Singer's discovery of Routh came through a tape that had been submitted for another production. When Singer saw it, he recognized something specific, not just physical similarity to Reeve, but a quality of stillness and genuine decency the character required. The actual Superman audition was almost secondary. Singer had effectively made the decision before Routh came in. Routh has since discussed what it was like to find out the role was his. He had not known he was a serious candidate, and the confirmation came as a genuine surprise. He went from almost entirely unknown to the star of a $270 million studio film in a relatively short period, which is the kind of career trajectory that happens only when a director decides early and holds the position. Fact 5. Kevin Spacey had wanted to play Lex Luthor for years before Singer cast him. Spacey's casting wasn't simply a matter of availability. He had wanted the role for years before Singer brought him in, a piece of background that adds a specific texture to his performance. His Luthor is a deliberate tonal echo of Gene Hackman's version, broadly menacing, theatrical, and aware of his own absurdity. Singer's intent was to build the film as a continuation of the 1978 and 1980 films rather than a reboot, which shaped every major casting decision. Spacey was playing a character Hackman had originated, in a film that explicitly acknowledged those films' existence. The theatrical exaggeration was not a failure of restraint, it was the designed register. Fact 6. Where do you build Metropolis when you want to save money? Warner Brothers moved the production to Fox Studios Australia in Sydney. The decision was driven by financial considerations. Australian tax incentives and exchange rates made the location substantially cheaper than comparable U.S. production. Metropolis was built on Sydney sound stages. The Midwestern landscapes of Smallville were found in regional New South Wales. The most American superhero ever created had his film made almost entirely in another country. The vast majority of audiences who saw the film had no idea. Fact 7. The moment the old theme plays, you know exactly what kind of film this is. Singer made an explicit decision to use John Williams' 1978 Superman theme as the film's musical foundation. Composer John Ottman built his score around that theme rather than replacing it, treating the Williams material as structural architecture rather than a legacy element to be respectfully cited and set aside. The decision was consistent with Singer's broader intent. This was a continuation, not a reboot. The same musical statement that opened the 1978 film opens Superman Returns. For audiences who had grown up with that sound, the effect was deliberately nostalgic. For younger audiences, it functioned as an immediate signal about the film's tone and ambition. Fact 8. What does it actually take to make someone look like they can fly? The physical demands of the role required Routh to spend significant time in wire rigs for the flight sequences. Wire work is technically demanding and physically exhausting. Extended suspension in harnesses, precise positional requirements, and the disorientation of performing without solid ground as a reference point. Routh trained extensively and performed a substantial proportion of the wire work himself, which required him to match the physical positioning of digital doubles with precision. His background in physical performance was a direct asset. The combination of practical wire work and digital effects the film relied on could only function if the live-action element was committed and accurate. 20 years of development, Nicolas Cage in costume tests, a complete unknown cast as the Man of Steel, and the entire film made in Australia without the audience noticing. We're not halfway through. Still coming, the age mathematics that the film never addressed, the box office equation that killed the sequel, and the bonus, a dedication that carries more weight than most films ever manage. Fact 9. One casting decision created a timeline the film could never explain. Lois Lane's age created an arithmetic problem the film never acknowledged. Bosworth was 22 when the film was shot. Her character had a son approximately 5 years old, which, given the film's timeline, implied she had been pregnant at 17 or 18. The film does not address this. The casting was driven by studio preference for a younger lead actress, rather than by what the story's internal logic required. The age mathematics became a recurring, critical observation. Fact 10. The film earned $391 million and was still considered a disappointment. Superman Returns grossed $391 million worldwide on a combined production and marketing budget of approximately $270 million. By most film standards, this is a clear commercial success. By the standards of what Warner Brothers needed to justify a sequel to a $270 million film, with decades of development costs attached, it fell short. The studio's calculation also incorporated the $40 million spent on unmade predecessors. The film needed to perform closer to the $500 million range to greenlight Singer's planned sequel. It didn't. 6 years later, Warner Brothers rebooted entirely with Man of Steel. The franchise that had taken nearly 20 years to get made lasted exactly one film. Fact 11. James Marsden was deliberately cast to make the audience's sympathy complicated. Richard White, Lois Lane's fiancé, is written and performed as a genuinely decent person who has done nothing wrong. Singer cast Marsden, who had recently played a structurally similar role in Singer's own X-Men films, in a part that deliberately avoided making the romantic rival a villain. Singer wanted the audience to feel the genuine moral complexity of Superman's return, not just a hero reclaiming his place, but the disruption he causes in lives that have genuinely moved on. Marsden played it with real dignity, giving Richard White a decency that made Superman's position considerably more uncomfortable than a straightforward comeback story would require. Fact 12. The film includes a near shot-for-shot quotation from the 1978 original. Singer built a series of deliberate visual callbacks to Richard Donner's Superman throughout the film. The most explicit is the scene in which Superman takes Lois on a night flight above Metropolis, structured almost identically to the equivalent scene in the original. The The decision was a statement of intent. Singer was making something that inhabited the same creative space rather than replacing it. Whether this represented artistic confidence or a failure to establish independent identity was the question that divided critics. Those who valued continuity found it moving. Those who wanted something genuinely new found it limiting. Both responses were reasonable reactions to the same deliberate choice. Fact 13. Singer left X-Men 3 to make this film, and it affected both franchises. Singer had directed X-Men and X2 and was widely expected to complete the trilogy. When Warner Brothers offered him Superman Returns, he departed before X-Men. The Last Stand was complete. Brett Ratner replaced him. The consequences ran in both directions. X-Men. The Last Stand was widely criticized, and many attributed this directly to the directorial change. Superman Returns, meanwhile, carried the full weight of Singer's ambition without the established goodwill he had built across two X-Men films. Both franchises were shaped by the single decision. Neither benefited from it. Fact 14. Parker Posey improvised much of her performance. Kitty Kowalski, Luther's increasingly guilt-ridden girlfriend, was played by Parker Posey with a spontaneity that was not entirely scripted. Singer gave her significant latitude, and several of the film's better comedic moments originated in her improvisations during production. Her chemistry with Spacey, a more controlled and deliberately theatrical performer, creates a productive tension. The contrast between Spacey's studied menace and Posey's reactive, escalating discomfort gives their scenes together an energy the script alone might not have generated. Fact 15. Brandon Routh returned to the role 14 years later in a television crossover. Routh's Superman was not ultimately finished in 2006. In 2019, the CW's Arrowverse crossover event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, brought him back as the Superman of the 2006 film, now older, retired, and given a conclusive story. The return was received warmly by fans who had always felt his performance deserved more than one film. For a franchise chapter that had been abandoned and replaced, it was an unexpectedly generous piece of closure. The Superman that one film couldn't sustain was given a proper ending 16 years after the fact by a television production willing to acknowledge that he had existed and mattered. And now the bonus I've been saving for last. Christopher Reeve's widow, Dana Reeve, saw the finished film shortly before her own cancer diagnosis in 2005. By multiple accounts, her reaction was deeply moved. She described Ruth's performance as a respectful and dignified tribute to her husband. Dana Reeve died in March 2006, just months before the film's theatrical release. She never saw the premiere. The film is dedicated to both her and Christopher Reeve. The final image of the closing credits carries the dedication in memory of Christopher and Dana Reeve. For a film so consciously built in the tradition of Reeve's Superman, the same theme, the same visual language, an actor chosen partly for his physical resemblance to the original, that dedication is not a formality. It is the moment when the full weight of what Singer was trying to preserve becomes most apparent. He wasn't just making a sequel, he was making an act of remembrance. And the two people it was made for never got to see it together.